The series we're going through right now is a series called Who? Me? And we're looking at people that God uses in Scripture, real people. They're not just stories, but real people that God reveals to us in Scripture, that all of them in some way or another looked at themselves in the mirror and thought, oh, God's not going to use me. Various reasons. We've looked last week at Rahab. She had quite a past. In fact, it was still in her present when she came to faith in God. It wasn't just the past, but she had quite a past. God still used her powerfully in the moment, worked through her. She was even in the lineage of Jesus himself. So God uses people from all different kinds of backgrounds. It's all a matter of faith. We talked about that last week. Before, we looked at good night. Who did we start with? Do you ever just blank out like that? Yeah, you do too. You weren't here for the first one, so you're Novell. First person on the deck was Novell.
Right.
Good job. Yes, it was. You have vested an interest in it being Gideon. It was Gideon. And and Gideon we know him for his bravery, but his bravery was born in fear. His bravery was born completely of faith, because that was not just his natural inclination. His natural inclination was to hide, actually, to try and stay out of trouble. And yet, God used him mightily that way. We'll look at a few more of these when I get back from Guatemala. And there's a whole book of it, if you want to find it, full of people that God uses that you just wouldn't see if you just look at the very surface of things. Just part of what our theme today will be. When I was a teenager, and I actually have a witness today. Somebody who knew me when I was a teenager is here today. These couple of people. When I was a teenager, I loved to drive. That has not changed. When I was a teenager, I loved to drive fast. That also has not changed. But now, through the work of the Holy Spirit, I have some self-control. I didn't say it was perfect. I said I have some self-control, more than I did at the time. In that time, I came to really appreciate a certain kind of car, okay? Now, I had an appreciation of all kinds of cars, of really anything with wheels, okay? You could give me a Yugo with only 3 of its 4 cylinders working, and I still would have fun with that car, okay? There's a way. Small cars, slow cars driven fast are a hoop, okay? But I came especially to an appreciation of cars that we call sleepers. Car guys know what I'm talking about. A sleeper is a car that on the surface looks like it's just a normal, everyday, probably kind of slow, boring car. I like a sleeper, okay? Sometimes those come in the form of what I had when I was a teenager. I had a 68 Plymouth Fury. It wasn't the hot rod version of the Fury. It was a 4-door sedan. It didn't even have the cool hardtop roof. It wasn't even a coupe. It was a 4-door hardtop sedan, plain white, cloth seats, all that. It had a V8, but it had the small V8. It had a 318. However, I was a teenager in the 1980s. Okay? You can read about that in the history books here on the Carburetor. But in the 1980s, cars were kind of choked. They had small control, but they hadn't completely gotten around just yet in terms of power. Nowadays, you go and you buy a Camry with a 4-cylinder that has more horsepower than a Camaro in 1985. Is that insane? The other day I looked up, we were talking about, Brian's not here, and I had an opportunity to tease him. That ain't right. But when he watches online, Brian, this is for you. The other day we were talking about an IROC Z, a Camaro IROC Z. 80s folks know what I'm talking about, except for Brian, or he was giving him a hard time because he didn't know what that was. So out of curiosity, I went back and looked because I couldn't remember which manual he was on, because I had horsepower figures running around here like crazy. I couldn't remember how much horsepower it had. It had a little over 200, like maybe 210, something like that. Who do what now? 215. I was off by 5 horsepower. That is not bad. I think maybe 220 with 95 octane. Anyway, he says 215, and I'm going to defer to Steve. 215 horsepower. So our minivan has around 250, 260, if I remember around. Isn't that crazy? So minivans now have more horsepower than Camaros did when I was a teenager. You're going, what does this tie into? I will get there, and it's going to make a lot of sense. So I had my 68 Plymouth Fury. In the 80s, a Mustang, same thing. You had to get the high-performance one. And it still had less horsepower. And even though my car was bigger, it didn't have things like, a few cars were starting to have airbags. It didn't have reinforced beams of the doors or things like that. So it really wasn't that heavy. In fact, a modern Honda Accord is heavier than a 68 Plymouth Fury. So anyway, it's weird, the figures, I know. I looked it up. Anyway, this car was lighter and more powerful, even though it was a big family car, than the Mustang of the time period. So as long as somebody came up to a stoplight in a newer Mustang, I knew I had them, but they didn't. Right? Now, I should say, I don't know, anybody here who is, new with their driver's license, fingers in your ears, okay? Because I am not condoning what I'm about to tell you that I did. Okay. So I was a stoplight racer. I did that all the time. And that car was way too fast. And I won't tell you how fast it was, but even in Germany, I would have gotten a ticket. So drove that car way too fast all the time on really dangerous bias-ply tires. And that was stupid. I will tell you up front, I know some of you don't like that word, but I'm going to use it anyway because it really was. It was stupid, but Robert says so. If you're the NIV. I pulled up to a stoplight one day, and a guy from high school, he was in my geometry class. His dad restored cars, and I mean, his dad did an awesome job. Absolutely. They didn't look showroom new. They looked better than showroom new. He pulls up next to me in a mid-70s Blazer with a 454 under the hood. I know. I'm causing some people to sad right now. It was beautiful. It was red and black. It was waxed really well. He had fantastic wheel and tire combo on this thing. It was jacked up a bit, but and he had a rumble to the exhaust. Oh, it's fantastic. There are guys who know exactly the sound I'm talking about. For those who aren't car people, maybe you just bake cakes. This wasn't the KitchenAid you get at Walmart. This was the KitchenAid that you order straight from KitchenAid, the one that's like as tall as your neighbor. Okay, maybe that covered all those. This Blazer, it was a good-looking car too, a truck. Really, really cool. He pulls up next to me. There's an intersection in San Angelo. A lot of you know it there at Sherwood Way Avenue, and where all that comes together. You got like 5 streets coming together. That was a great place to try and race people. But that's where we were. And he starts, and I just looked at him and smiled. Babe, I know you. I didn't rev my engine. I didn't do anything. I'm in a 68 Plymouth Fury. I should have put a picture up, but if you just imagine, boring 1968 family car, you got the idea. Okay? Picture cars in the Wonder Years. This was the car. I just sat there, but I got ready. And when that light turned green, I smoked my tires all the way through the intersection and waved at him in the rearview mirror. We got to geometry class that morning, and he comes running over to me. He's like, "What do you have in that car?" And when I told him it was a 318, you should have seen sadness on his face. 318, you don't have to be a car guy. 318, 454, you do the math, okay? He was so disappointed. But we had fun talking about it, and it was hilarious. And you just kind of learn. You got to watch. Some people have sleepers. Now, there was another lesson later on. I made it like you can get a little bit too sure of yourself. I was smoking people at lights all the time. And then we pulled up one time, me and some guys from the youth group, we pulled up one night at a stoplight, and a guy comes up next to me, and he's in like a 67 Mustang. Well, that means all my advantage is gone. Gone. And it was nice, too. You couldn't see the people in there until we took off. We both floored it, and I lost that race handily, and all we could see was their teeth through the tinted windows as they laughed at us and then left us behind. It was a sad moment. Anyway, you would look at that car, you would think there is no way you would never have won any races with that thing. There's no way you would beat something with a 454 in it, but it happened. We judge things all the time by the outside. We judge things all the time by what we think we see and what we assume is on the inside. And we get it really wrong. Like my friend in my geometry class, got it really, really wrong and had to watch the taillights just head off into the sunrise. It was on the way to school. Our life spiritually can be exactly the same way. And I want us to look this morning. We know this passage probably about Samuel's instructions from God about how to choose a king for Israel. But I want to look at it not just for what it shows us about David and the surprise that is there, but I want to look at it for the surprise that we see in God and his character as we look at this interaction. Okay? So, little context. You know about Saul. Saul was a king in Israel, the first king of Israel. They had requested a king against God's wisdom and against what he said he wanted. But God finally said, fine, you can have a king. You'll learn your lesson. He's going to tax you. He's going to send your kids to war. Sound familiar? And all of these things, you don't really want that. They said, yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Everybody else has one. And he said, okay, learn your lesson. And he gives them Saul. Looked like a king. Now, I hit my clicker here. But Saul looks like a king. This is a pretty good rendition, I think, of what people at the time would have wanted in a king. He was a strong man. He was a tall man. He had a regalness to, is that a word? A regal air to him. As he served as king and as he would walk the halls and approach his throne, he looked, as we would say, presidential, okay? He looked kingly. He was what the world expected. And he was what God gave them first. Unfortunately, Saul was not living up to appearances. He looked like he would be a wise man. He looked like he was a strong man. And he won battles and he led them to some victories, but he didn't have the character to back up the power that he exuded and the strength that people assumed he had and that he did sometimes exert. And power without character is foolishness. Power without character is foolishness. And we learn that through Saul. Character matters. We live in a time where we try to say it doesn't, and we're dead wrong, folks. Character will always matter because there will always be challenges that require a godly character. You can't squeeze turnip from a rock. You can't get godly character from those who don't have it. And if you think I'm getting into politics, you're dead wrong. We're also selecting elders at the moment. We're also trying to grow the next generation of kids who will grow into adult believers, who will be our next leaders. And we need to remember in whatever place they serve, whether that's as an elder or a deacon or a teacher or a plumber, an electrician. Plumbers and electricians, does character matter? Yes, you do. You find mechanics, plumbers, and electricians based more on their character than anything else. I can deal with them having to take their time and figure out and solve a problem that they weren't familiar with when they're honest, much better than I can deal with them being very talented and yet taking you right and left, right? Character matters no matter what setting you are in. Saul didn't have it. Saul made all kinds of mistakes, and at times he thought he was wiser than God. And so when God told him with the Amalekites, I want you to destroy all of their livestock and all of that, and we could look then and go, well, why did he want him to do that? It's not the issue. The issue is God had told him to get it done. And Saul said, wow, but they're good sheep. I mean, it seems a shame to waste them. He was a hoarder like some of y'all. Now, it just seems a shame to waste the sheep. And so he hides them, he thinks, from God. How often does that work, by the way? Hiding things from God. It just doesn't. So there's a line when he gets caught. What? You got rid of them all? Yeah, I got rid of them all. What's that? Meh, I hear back there. And he got caught because he thought he could outsmart God. He just didn't follow through on everything he was supposed to do. He didn't have the character to finish the work. Started it, but he didn't finish it. Then one of the last straws was he then second guesses God, and he goes to a medium and divines an interaction with the dead in spite of God's commands never to touch those things, never to be involved in those things. Saul goes and does it. And that was enough. That was it. Saul, you're done. He was done. So that's the context. You have a man who just did not live up to the character to which God had called him to live by. And so now we've got to find a new king. And how do you find a new king? Well, he sends the prophet Samuel. And this is what happens and what instructions Samuel receives during this search. The Lord said to Samuel, this is going to start in verse 1. It won't all be on the screen. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." Well, okay, so that at least narrows it down, right, to a half dozen or so guys. Somewhere in this group of people, you're going to have a king. God had given him that much. But Samuel said, "Well, how can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." That's probably a legitimate concern. If you watch the rest of Saul's life, seems a little insecure, doesn't he? Doesn't like it when God decides that somebody else will be king instead of him. And so he tries a few times to kill David, doesn't he? Not a man of godly character. "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you are to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." So what was God's instruction to Samuel about how he was going to protect him? Did you catch it? There wasn't any. There was nothing. God ignores the question. He's like, "So here's what you're going to do, Samuel. I want you to go." "Oh, but God, he might kill me." "And here's what you're going to do, Samuel." Anybody ever gotten those instructions? I think everybody with parents has gotten those instructions. "But Dad," and this is what happens. It's what happens. God just keeps going. "You are to anoint for me the one that I indicate." The implication is there, though. If you believe in me and you trust me, Samuel, you won't have to ask that question. I've given you a task. I'm telling you you're going to finish it, so just go. It's much like what you see with Paul when he knows that he is going to go to Jerusalem and to Rome and different places at different times, and people try to talk him out of it, and he would just say, "God told me that I'm going to do this, this, and this while I'm there." And he's saying, I believe that if God says I'll accomplish it, I'll accomplish it. And if God sends me to do it, he must intend for me to be safe enough to do it. And so he would just go. And that's what God is teaching Samuel in this moment. Samuel did, to his credit, Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. And they asked, "Do you come in peace?" Isn't that something? He comes to town. He was the one who was nervous, but when he gets there, they're the ones who are scared. Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." He just looks at this guy and goes, "Now that is what a king looks like. Surely Eliab is the one." He was not. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. A lot of us know this verse already because this is a powerful verse that speaks to a lot of us. It speaks encouragement, and it speaks a good reminder that it is not what is on the surface that determines whether or not we are people that will be victorious in our faith, whether or not we are people who are worthy to God, whether or not we are people who can do what God calls us to do. It speaks all of that to us. And yet he wasn't even talking to us. He's talking to Samuel about what not to look for. And what does he say? Don't look for. Don't look at his height. Don't look at, that's just so irrelevant to whether or not he'll be a good king. Doesn't mean short people make good kings either. Look at Napoleon. It just doesn't all work that way at all. He says, God doesn't judge the way you people judge. You're always judging things by the way they look or the way they make you feel or all of these things. God looks at the inside, at who is this person and what is their character. Now, he's teaching us something. God is saying, this is the way you judge. And I'm talking about judge being discerning and determining what is best, wise, who is the best for a task. You don't look
at appearances. You don't look at things the way the world looks at things, whether it's other things besides appearance. It's not the same standards. You need to learn what God looks for. So you look at Scripture and you look at what God has revealed. You say, what does God say makes a faithful man or woman? What does God say makes a godly father, mother, grandparent? What does God say makes a good, loving, kind, strong, honest neighbor? And that's what you go by. He says, God is going to look at your character. He looks at your heart. He looks at who you are that nobody else sees. Now, in some cases, sometimes, that could be a bad thing. Because sometimes that's going to mean that God will reject the one that we would choose, or He will choose the one that we would reject, because God knows better. And that's what happens here. Let's keep going. Verse 8. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. Samuel, at this point, might be a little confused because he's going, this all the kids you got? Because none of them, I don't know what to do. God told me no. None of them. You got any more kids? Is there somebody you didn't tell me about? So Jesse asked, verse 11, are these all the sons you have? Well, there's still the youngest, Jesse answered. He's tending the sheep. And Samuel said, send him. We will not sit down until he arrives. Go get him. Why had Jesse done that? Because Jesse judged the way people judged. He looked at his kids and he says, well, it's not going to be that one. Why would it be that one? He was the runt of the litter. Some of you, when you go to pick a dog, a pet, a cat, maybe you like the runt. You know, you like the underdog. Oh, look at the cute little baby. You know, all that sort of thing. But that's not the way people typically choose kings, especially a man who's going to be, job qualification, a warrior king. And yet, they call David up. And who was it that God had chosen? So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and a fine appearance and handsome features. The Lord said to him, rise and anoint him. This is the one. Now, you might get distracted by verse 12. He was glowing with health and had fine appearance and handsome features, and that's the way we think of David. So we start to go, well, I thought you said he didn't look like a king. Well, no, because he's like this kid. Let me go up there. Where is it? Oh, there we go. He's just a kid. This guy looks almost like a hobbit, doesn't he? He would be the hobbit kid. That's who God chose? Yeah. Maybe that's part of the theme of The Hobbit. That's who God chose? Why? Would there be any mistake about who was working through him later? No. Saul sometimes even fooled himself into thinking it was his own strength that he used. David knew he was there by the grace of God. He wasn't perfect. He would make mistakes. Some things he would do were bigger than what we could call mistakes. But what did he have? Character. How do we know that? One, we've cheated. We've read a lot of his life. But two, God said he did. And does God know character when he sees it? He does. Does he know what to look for? He does. And in 2 Chronicles, right? Yes. I always want to say first, but Second Chronicles, I already passed it. He tells us that the eyes of the Lord look to and fro throughout the earth, seeking those whom he may strongly defend. And what kind of people are those that he will strongly defend? It says those whose hearts are completely his. Saul's heart was not completely his. He showed that time after time after time. David's was. This is what God looks for. A heart that is fully given to God. He doesn't look for perfection. David was not perfect. He showed that several times. He doesn't look for the strongest, the tallest, the most powerful, the most talented. He doesn't look for certain talents that get amplified over other talents. He's not looking at talent at all. The Spirit will give you what you need, whether you had it or not, as far as those things go. But a heart that is completely given, that's the special quality God looks for. That's another way of looking at the word, faith. I believe him so much, my heart is his. My heart is completely his. That's faith, isn't it? And that was David. We see him go through things that would have broken most people. And he doesn't get through them because he was stronger or because he was a superhero. He gets through them because in those moments too, he leaned in on the God to whom he'd given his heart. He leaned on the God he trusted, and he leaned on the God that he believed. That's what made David David. It was his faith. There is an athlete. Did I get the right picture? Yes, because I don't want to click too soon. I already did that once. There's an athlete I wanted to share with you about this morning that kind of tells us some of these same things. Her name is Wilma Rudolph. If you're not familiar with her, she was born back in 1940 in Tennessee, and she was born premature. And so, you know, a lot of you had that experience within your own families. Maybe some of you were premature born babies, and it comes with some extra challenges. On top of being born premature, she was the 20th. I'm going to check my notes. I'm really sure that's right, but that just seems supernatural of her mother. Yes, that's right. She was born 20th of 22 siblings. She also, on top of being premature, on top of being way down the totem pole, she had, as a child, pneumonia. She suffered scarlet fever. Both of those can be fatal. And she had polio. And that's why in the picture, you see her there with a brace on her leg. Doctors told her that she would never walk again. Her mother had a different vision for her. Her mother tried to get her, though, into physical therapy, and because this is back in the 1950s, and she was black, she was not allowed to have physical therapy at the hospital in her town. They did not have a desegregated hospital, and they weren't going to desegregate any of it for her. So her mother had to drive her once a week to Nashville. It was a 100-mile trip. She drove her every week to Nashville, where they found a hospital that would treat her. And so she would do that, and then at home, her mother would administer massage and PT and things like that to help her to walk again, even though the doctors kept saying, it's a lost cause, she's never going to walk again. At age 11, she could walk with a brace. At age 15, she gave her life to Jesus Christ. At age 16, she qualified for the Olympics in Melbourne, Australia. At age 16. At 11, she's still just barely walking with a brace. At age 16, she qualifies for the Olympics. I think she got a bronze. When she was a senior in high school, nobody's perfect. When she was a senior in high school, she had a baby. And a lot of people would have ended their career right there. They would have given up. They would have assumed that they were out of their shot. She did not. That's age probably around 17, 18. At age 20, she qualifies for the Olympics in Rome. At the Olympics in Rome, she wins not one, not two, but 3 gold medals. Who would have thought that a child in a brace with polio would win the Olympics and 3 gold medals? Who would have thought that a young single mother would win the Olympics, and especially in 1960? There were people who would have thought that her skin color might have been a detriment. She never let it be a problem. 3 gold medals, 3 world records. And she was then known as the fastest woman on earth. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody saw it coming. When they asked her, how did you do this? She said this: my doctor told me I would never walk again. My mother told me I would. I believed my mother. That is just awesome. I believed my mother. Not everybody has a mom like that. Not everybody has a father like that, or anybody in their life that tells them that you'll walk again. Thank the Lord she did. But do you know what we all do have? David walked up to that group of his brothers that day with all the odds stacked against him, because he was not the one to be king according to everybody else. She walked up to the hospital, a healed woman, the same hospital that said, you will never, because somebody told her she could. God looks at you, and he knows your heart, and he knows your character, and he knows your flaws. She had them, David had them. He knows all those things. And he says to you, I know what you can do by the power of the Holy Spirit. I know what you can do by the grace of Jesus Christ, and I know what you can do by my word. He knows. People will tell you you can't. Satan will tell you you can't. Your own reflection in the mirror will on days tell you you cannot. Your Father in heaven tells you you can. Believe your Father, so that on that day you can say like she did, they all told me I wasn't going to make it. They all told me I'd never be here. My dad told me I could, and I believed him.